You are safe here, far away from updates and timelines, from blinking screens and constant replies. You are drifting into something older, something slower, a world that waited, that wandered, that whispered instead of shouted. This is not a dream. This is a memory, a place your mind remembers even if you don't. Tonight we return to the 1990s, but not the version in commercials or costume parties. The quiet version, the real version, and maybe the one part of you still misses. This is boring nostalgia for sleep. Each video is a soft return to forgotten times, not to chase the thrill of the past, but to gently rest inside it. Tonight's story is about what we lost when the 90s quietly slipped away. For stories, each different, each part of something bigger. Segment 1 is about life without the internet, the quiet spaces between connections. Segment 2 tells the true story of Napster and how music was changed forever by one college student's idea. Segment 3 explores the mystery of Y2K, the fear, the silence, and what almost happened. And Segment 4 reveals the strange world of 90s tech millionaires, those who saw the future before the rest of us caught up. So get comfortable, sink in, and let time rewind. Let's begin in the middle of the day at summer. You're bored, not frustrated bored, but the kind of boredom that leads somewhere. You've already eaten breakfast. You've already stared out the window. Now you're just sitting, and that's okay, because there is no phone to check, no game to boot up instantly, no stream to fill the quiet. So you wander into your backyard, into your bookshelf, into your thoughts, and something starts to take shape. A plan, a world, a game you just invented. And suddenly the day begins again. Not because something appeared, but because you made it appear. Boredom was the seed, and time was the soil. It was slow. It was patient. You built forts out of couch cushions, drew mazes on printer paper with jagged teeth. You left voicemails for your friends and waited for them to call back. And when they did, the phone was attached to the wall. You stretched the cord as far as it would go, so no one would hear you talking. And even then, they still did. You ate dinner at the table, not in front of a screen. You passed salt. You told stories. You sat through silence. And somehow it all meant something. You knew what your parents looked like when they were tired. You could tell who was upset without them saying a word, because you were there, fully there. And so were they. At school, you passed notes written in pencil, folded into triangles or hearts or something in between. You learned to read handwriting like it was a secret code, sometimes messy, sometimes neat, always personal. You couldn't edit your message after you sent it, and that made every word matter. You waited days for a reply, and when it came, you held it like it was gold. A message meant just for you. No profile picture, no read receipt, just ink and intention. Friendships were built one block at a time, one conversation, one walk home, one slow moment of real presence. You didn't scroll through someone's life. You sat in it, shoulder to shoulder, on a curb, on a swing, on a long ride to nowhere. You talked until you ran out of things to say, and then you sat in silence. And that was fine, because silence didn't mean the conversation was over. It meant you were still there. This was a life with fewer connections, but deeper ones, because when everything wasn't instant, every moment became more alive, more deliberate, more yours. The slowness made space for meaning. The silence made space for memory. And in that space, something precious grew, something we don't always have now, but something we can remember together. It's 1999, and a college student is typing something that will change the world. His name is Sean Fanning, and the thing he's building isn't just a program. It's a key that will unlock almost every song ever recorded and hand it to anyone who wants it for free. He calls it Napster, named after his childhood nickname. And like most ideas that change everything, it starts simple. What if you could search for a song, click a button, and download it from someone else's computer? No money, no waiting, just the music. And that's exactly what it did. Within weeks, it spreads, quietly at first, then like wildfire, tens of thousands, then millions, all trading files, all building a new kind of music library, one that didn't require permission, one that ignored record labels and copyright law, one that felt rebellious, but also inevitable. Suddenly, you could find anything, songs from your childhood, rare recordings, live bootlegs, entire discographies in folders with misspelled names, all available in seconds. You typed in a word, and watched a new world appear, one track at a time, and each one felt like treasure, because it wasn't supposed to be yours. But now it was. For kids in the 90s, Napster was a miracle, a portal, a jukebox without quarters. You could burn a CD, make your own mix, design your own label with a Sharpie, and pass it to a friend, or play it in your Discman, or leave it spinning in your first car. It didn't matter where the music came from. It just mattered that it played. And it did, again and again, for free. But something was brewing in the background. Not everyone was thrilled. Record companies watched the numbers, the losses, the vanishing sales. And then came Metallica, one of the biggest bands in the world, suddenly in front of cameras, pointing at Napster, suing them, naming users by screen name. And the floodlights came on. Now, everyone was watching. Was it theft? Or freedom? Was it rebellion? Or just disrespect? The courts argued. The lawyers battled. Napster was dragged into hearings. Its founders questioned. Its users shamed. And in the end, the answer was simple. You cannot give away what you do not own. Even if it feels right. Even if it feels small. Even if everyone is doing it. Napster was shut down. But something had already changed. The music industry would never be the same. The silence after Napster was loud. But only for a moment, because in that silence, new things began. LimeWire, Kazaa, BitTorrent, and eventually, Spotify, Apple Music, streaming giants. Legal this time, but still shaped by what Napster started. If you were a teenager back then, you remember the sound of a song downloading, the slow crawl of the progress bar, the joy of finding something rare, the risk of clicking something mislabeled, the strange thrill of ownership without permission. It felt like power. But also community, a massive invisible library, built by strangers, shared without cost. Precaution. Today, music comes with algorithms, subscriptions, terms of service. It is polished, predictable, convenient. But something was lost when Napster died. Not just the chaos, not just the piracy, but the wonder, the discovery, the strange digital whisper that said, "Here, this is for you." Even if it shouldn't be. Napster was a comet. Brief, bright, gone. But the trail it left is still glowing. In every playlist you didn't buy, in every song you didn't expect, in the quiet comfort of pressing play, without thinking where it came from. Now imagine the world holding its breath. 1 second before midnight. On the final night of 1999, the lights are on. The television is glowing. A glass ball is descending in Times Square. But in the back of many minds, there's a question. What happens next? Not just in the new year, but in the machines, the systems, the code. Because somewhere deep inside the computers that run the world, something very small might go very wrong. This was the Y2K bug, a simple flaw, born from old habits. Early programmers used only 2 digits to represent the year. 1975 was just 75. 1999 was just 99. It saved space. It saved memory. But it also created a problem. Because when the clocks hit 00, would the systems think it was 1900? Would the planes fall? Would the banks forget your money? Would the power go out? Would the nuclear weapons arm themselves? The questions came. And so did the fear. By late 1999, governments around the world were preparing for collapse. Emergency task forces were created. Billions of dollars were spent on fixes. Consultants reviewed millions of lines of code. Old systems were upgraded or replaced. Meetings were held in underground bunkers. Generators were tested. Batteries were stockpiled. And quietly, people wondered, will the world end? Not with fire, but with a date format. News anchors speculated. Tech experts warned. Supermarkets sold out of water and canned food. Families unplugged their computers before midnight. Some flew to the countryside to be safe. Some stayed awake all night, waiting, listening, watching the clock tick toward the unknown. It wasn't panic, but it wasn't peace. It was the soft tension of maybe, the quiet dread of what if. And then, midnight came, and the lights stayed on. Planes kept flying. The banks still worked. The world had held its breath. And nothing happened. Or at least, that's how it felt. But behind the scenes, something very real had happened. The fixes had worked. The code had been cleaned. The effort had been quiet. But massive, what looked like nothing, was actually success. Thousands of bugs had been prevented. Disasters had been dodged. Because people had acted in time. Because the danger had been real. just unseen. Still, the memory of Y2K faded quickly. It became a joke, a punchline, a thing people remembered with a smirk, not with seriousness. But for a moment, the entire world paused to consider how fragile it had become, how much was held up by invisible logic, by dates and digits, by systems built on assumptions. And maybe that's the real story. Not that the world didn't end, but that we glimpsed how easily it could, not with fire, but with a clock. If you were alive back then, you remember the countdown, not just the party, but the quiet underneath it. You remember the headlines, the warnings, the last-minute updates, the lines at the ATM, the sense that something might change, something big. And when it didn't, you exhaled and never thought about it again. But some part of you still remembers the stillness, the silence, the long pause before the world stepped into a new century. That was Y2K, not a disaster, but a warning, wrapped in nothing. Let's begin in a room that doesn't feel real, not because of its size, but because of its silence. A minimalist mansion perched on a cliffside. White walls, glass tables, a desk with 6 phones, a single server humming in the next room. This is where the future lives. Or at least that's what they thought. It's 1998, and someone just made $1 million without selling a single thing. This is the dot-com era. The internet is young, the rules are unclear, and the money is real. Startups appear like sparks. Names like Pets.the landscape, Pets.com, Webvan, eToys, Excite, Ask Jeeves. Every week a new company is born. Every week someone becomes a millionaire. Sometimes in their 20s, sometimes in their pajamas. Because all it takes is a name, a website, a pitch deck, and enough people to believe. The dot-com moguls of the 90s were not like the millionaires before them. They didn't wear suits. They didn't play golf. They wore cargo shorts to board meetings. They held parties with laser shows and sushi waterfalls. They drove cars they couldn't pronounce and bought office chairs that cost more than rent. It was excess. The numbers were going up. That was enough. Meanwhile, most people lived a different version of the 90s. They waited in traffic. They shopped in stores. They balanced checkbooks. The moguls lived fast, but not always well. Pressure was constant. The future was unclear. They were building things no one had built before. They were hiring too fast, spending too much, scaling something no one understood. And in the quiet moments, they worried. Is this real? Will this last? Will they find out? By the year 2000, the answer began to take shape. The bubble trembled. Then it burst. Suddenly, shares plummeted. Companies folded. Fortunes vanished overnight. Stock options became worthless. Mansions were sold. Servers unplugged. And the silence returned. But some survived. The ones that built slowly. The ones that didn't chase hype. Amazon, eBay, Google. These were not just names. They were seeds, planted during the storm, growing afterward, in a world finally ready. Today, we live in their shadow, in a world they imagined, a world they sometimes guessed into being. We order everything online, we connect through glowing screens. We track our steps and send emojis and pay without touching. But back then, it was all new, unbelievable, and sometimes unbearable. If you were a kid during that time, you may not have understood what a startup was, or why your neighbor suddenly drove a Ferrari, or why your teacher mentioned IPOs at lunch. But you felt it, that buzz in the air, that sense that something was coming, something invisible, but powerful. The dot-com kings were not royalty. They were dreamers, gamblers, and sometimes just lucky. But their world was strange, filled with champagne and code, with pressure and promise, with servers and parties and sleepless nights. That world is mostly gone now, folded into the background of our digital lives. But for a few years, it was real, loud, and then silent, a ghost built out of money and belief. Now the story fades, back into the hush of sleep. You've wandered through another time, a vanished world, not because it was better, and tonight you returned. You remembered a day without the internet. You listened to the fall of a music empire. You watched the clock tick past midnight with the world on edge. And you saw a few young dreamers rise on code and crash into quiet. These were not just events. They were echoes of a time that shaped us and then slipped away. Sleep now, with the gentle hum of dial-up, the rustle of printed notes, the hush after midnight, and the memory of what we lost when the 90s ended.